The desert stretched endlessly under a burning red sky. Sand was not soft but sharp like tiny blades, cutting the skin of anyone who dared to cross it. No water, no shade, no life. People called it the desert of no return because no one who entered came back. Somewhere in that endless wasteland, an alien girl lay on her side, half buried in dust. Her lips were cracked, her breathing shallow. The wind whipped her hair across her face, but she was too weak to move it away. Not eaten in 2 days, had not tasted water in 3. Her skin burned under the sun, yet her body shook from the cold that came with weakness. She had been left there by her own people. They said she was too small, too weak, too useless to keep alive. The tribe had no place for someone who could not hunt or fight. They had taken their weapons and water and walked away, leaving her in the sand without even looking back. At first, she had tried to crawl after them, but the heat stole her strength. Every step felt heavier until her arms gave out and she fell, the sand swallowing her lower half. She lay there for hours, the sun moving slowly across the sky. The only sound was the wind, until it was. At first, she thought it was her, mind playing tricks, but the sound grew clearer. Footsteps, heavy, steady, crunching on the sand. Her heart began to race in fear. Out here, footsteps meant danger. A predator, a scavenger, maybe a slaver. She had no strength to run or hide. All she could do was wait. Through the heat haze, a figure appeared. Tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in black armor that shimmered under the sun. Her helmet hid his face, but even from a distance she could feel the weight of his gaze. In his hand he carried a strange weapon, long, metallic, with a barrel she had never seen before. He was human. She had heard stories about them since she was a child, stories told to frighten the young. Humans were said to be dangerous, unpredictable. Warriors who came from a death world, where every plant and animal tried to kill them. Her people spoke of humans with fear, claiming they had no mercy for other species. And now, one stood before her. The human stopped a few steps away, his shadow falling over her body. For a long moment, neither moved. She expected him to turn away or finish her off quickly. Instead, he crouched down. She could see his eyes through the dark visor, sharp but not cold. She tried to speak, but her voice was a whisper. "Why are you here?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into a pouch and pulled out a small silver device. It lit up, scanning her from head to toe, beeping softly. He glanced at the display, his eyes narrowing. Without a word, he slid the device away and reached for her. She flinched as his armored arms lifted her from the sand with surprising ease. She weighed almost nothing in his grip. Her head rested against his chest plate, feeling the faint hum of machinery beneath it. She wanted to ask again why he was helping her, but her voice failed her. Her people would never risk themselves for a stranger. Why would this human? The sun burned hotter, yet his steps were steady. He carried her like a soldier carrying a wounded comrade. The desert wind howled, trying to push them back, but he moved forward without slowing. The girl could feel her body giving in to sleep, but her mind fought to stay awake. She didn't trust him, couldn't trust him. Yet something in the way he held her felt different from the cold. Hard grip of a captor. In the distance, she saw dark shapes rising from the horizon mountains. And in those shadows, perhaps water, perhaps shelter. But those mountains were far. She didn't believe they would reach them before nightfall. She looked up at his face again. Through the visor, his eyes never scanned the ground for danger. They scanned the horizon, as if searching for something or someone. It was then she noticed the weapon slung across his back, scarred and battered, yet cared for like a treasure. The air shifted suddenly. Far away, something roared, the deep mechanical growl of an engine. The human stopped, turning his head toward the sound. The girl's blood went cold. She knew that sound. Hunters. Her tribe sometimes used them to chase down those they cast out, ensuring no one survived to beg for mercy later. They traveled in speeders, armed with blasters and nets. They would take her back only to make her death slower. The human adjusted his grip on her, lowering her gently behind a rock outcrop. He didn't speak, but the message was clear. Stay. Hidden, she pressed herself against the rock, heart pounding, watching as he unslung his weapon. The sunlight caught the barrel, flashing once before he moved into position. The roar of engines grew louder, the sand vibrating beneath them. She could see the dust cloud of the hunters approach, their speeders cutting across the desert like knives. The human didn't move until they were close enough for her to see their faces twisted with cruel smiles. Then, with one smooth motion, he raised his weapon and fired. The sound cracked through the desert air like thunder. One of the speeders exploded into flames, spinning out of control. The other swerved, but he kept firing, each shot hitting its mark. She could only stare, her fear mixed with something she had not felt in days. Hope. The hunters scattered, retreating into the heat haze, their engines fading into the distance. The human lowered his weapon, scanning the horizon one last time. Then he turned back to her. And for the first time, she thought she saw something in his eyes that her people had never shown her. Not pity, not duty, but a decision to keep her alive. The desert was quiet again, but it was not the silence of peace. It was the heavy, watchful silence that comes after danger passes, silence that warns the enemy could return at any moment. The human warrior stood with his weapon in hand, his chest rising and falling with slow, measured breaths. His helmet turned from side to side, scanning the horizon, making sure the hunters were truly gone. The alien girl still crouched behind the rock, her eyes wide, her pulse racing. When he finally lowered his weapon, he stepped toward her. Without speaking, he lifted her again, settling her carefully against his shoulder. Our armor was rough. In some places, smooth in others, scratched by battles she could only imagine. They began walking, his boots crunching in the sand. Each step was steady, as if he carried no weight at all, yet she knew she was not light. The mountains in the distance were closer now, their jagged peaks cutting into the red sky. Somewhere between those peaks lay safety. Or so she hoped. She found her voice enough to whisper, "Why did you save me?" He didn't answer. Silence was not the kind that ignored. It was the kind that held something back, as if the truth was too heavy to put into words. She studied his face through the visor, but all she could see was her own reflection in the dark glass. The heat pressed down on them, the air shimmering with waves of light. The human stopped for a moment, reached into a pouch, and pulled out a small metal container. He pressed a button, and it hissed open. Inside was water. She almost cried at the sight. He held it to her lips, tilting it slowly so she wouldn't choke. The first sip was cold, the second sweeter than anything she had tasted before. It slid down her throat, washing away the dry ache that had been with her for days. When she had taken enough, he pulled the container back and sealed it. She wanted to thank him, but her voice caught. No one had ever shared water with her before, not even in her tribe. As they moved again, the wind began to change, shifted from hot and dry to sharp and gritty. The human looked up, reading the sky like a book. Dark clouds of sand were building on the horizon, rolling toward them with frightening speed. A sandstorm. She had been in one before, the wind strong enough to strip skin, the sand blinding and choking. In such storms you could lose your way, in seconds, and never find it again. The human quickened his pace, heading toward a cluster of dark shapes at the base of the nearest mountain. As they drew closer, she saw the remains of a stone structure, an old outpost, long abandoned. One wall still stood, giving some shelter from the wind. Inside, the floor was covered in dust and broken tools. The human set her down gently against the wall. He crouched and began pulling items from his pack, a small device that sparked into life, creating a flickering flame, and a pack of strange-looking food wrapped in thin silver sheets. The fire's warmth spread quickly, pushing back the chill that always followed exhaustion. He handed her a packet of food. She unwrapped it and found a soft bar with a smell she didn't recognize. She hesitated, then took a bite. It was warm, slightly sweet, and full of energy. She finished it before she could think, her body hungry for more. When she looked up, he was watching her, not with judgment, but with a quiet kind of understanding. She asked again, "Why did you save me?" This time he answered. His voice was deep, calm, carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. Because no one else would. She didn't know how to reply. In her world, saving someone who had nothing to offer was foolish. People only helped if there was a gain: food, water, power. Yet this man had risked his life for her without asking. For anything in return, outside, the wind began to howl, the sandstorm hitting the outpost with full force. Sand blew in through the gaps in the walls, covering the floor in thin layers. The human adjusted his gear and sat by the entrance, his weapon across his knees, his gaze locked on the storm as if waiting for something. The girl watched him in the firelight. The scars on his armor told a story not of survival alone, but of standing in battles no one else would fight. His silence was heavy, but not empty. She began to wonder what kind of man would cross this desert alone. A sudden noise cut through. The wind, faint but sharp. Metal scraping against stone. The human's head turned instantly toward the sound. His hand rested on his weapon, his body tensing like a predator ready to strike. The girl froze, her breath shallow. Another scrape, closer this time. Then a shadow moved just outside the entrance. The human didn't wait for a clearer view. He rose smoothly, stepping into the doorway, his weapon raised. The storm outside made it hard to see, but therein, the swirling sand, a figure was moving toward them, not a hunter. Something else. The human took a step forward, blocking the girl from view. His voice, calm but edged with steel, cut through the storm. "Who's there?" No answer came, only the sound of the wind. But the figure didn't stop moving. The girl's pulse quickened. Whoever or whatever it was, the human had just made a choice. Not to hide, not to run, to stand. The storm screamed against the walls of the ruined outpost, shaking loose dust and sand from the cracks above. The human stood at the doorway, weapon raised, while the alien girl held her breath from the shadows. The shape outside was still moving, slow at first, then faster, like it had finally decided to rush in. A flash of lightning lit the swirling sand. And in that instant, she saw the figure's outline, tall, wrapped in ragged cloth, its eyes glowing a faint red. Not a hunter from her tribe, but something worse. A tracker. Trackers didn't give up. Once they locked on to a scent, they followed it across deserts, mountains, and oceans if needed. And this one was here for her. The human fired a single shot, the sound like thunder in the storm. The figure dropped to its knees but didn't fall. Instead it hissed, a sound that cut through the wind, then rose again, charging forward. Human didn't back up. He stepped out into the storm, vanishing into the wall of sand. The girl's heart pounded as she heard the muffled sounds of the fight, metal striking metal. The deep grunt of effort, the sharp crack of gunfire, then silence. Moments later he returned, dragging the body of the tracker. Its weapon was still clutched in one hand, but its glowing eyes had gone dark. He tossed it aside and shut the door against the storm. "We need to move," he said simply. She stared at him. Move. In this storm was madness. But the human was already gathering, their things strapping his weapon to his back. His movements were quick but controlled. Like a man who had done this too many times before, without waiting for her answer, he lifted her again. The heat from the fire faded behind them as they stepped into the chaos outside. The sand hit her, skin like needles, stinging her eyes. She buried her face against his chest plate, trusting him to know where he was going. Through the storm, the sound of engines roared again, but this time closer, angrier. The hunters had returned, and now they had backup. The human adjusted his grip and began to run. Even carrying her, he moved fast, weaving between jagged rocks that jutted from the sand. The roar of engines grew louder, joined by the sharp whine of energy weapons charging. A blast of red light tore past them, striking a rock and shattering it into shards. The girl gasped. The hunters weren't trying to capture her now. They wanted her dead. The human didn't stop. He spotted a narrow gap between two cliffs and darted toward it. The speeders followed, their engines echoing off the stone walls. The gap twisted sharply, forcing the hunters to slow, but the human kept his pace. his boots slamming against the ground with each step. Another blast hit the cliff beside them, sending dust and rock raining down. The girl clung to him, every muscle in her body tense. She didn't dare look back, but she could hear the hunters shouting to each other, their voices carrying in the canyon. Finally, the passage opened into a wide canyon floor. The human set her down behind a large boulder. "Stay here," he ordered. Before she could protest, he sprinted toward the center of the canyon, drawing the hunters' attention. 3 speeders swerved to chase him, their weapons firing in rapid bursts. He moved like water, dodging each shot, returning fire with deadly accuracy. One speeder exploded in a burst of flames. The second swerved too hard, smashing into a rock wall. The third kept coming, its driver determined, but the human dove to the side at the last second, firing a single shot that hit the engine. The machine spun out and crashed in the dust. The girl's chest rose and fell with quick breaths. She had never seen anyone fight like that, not even the strongest warriors of her tribe. It wasn't just strength, it was control, precision, the ability to read the battle before it happened. But the victory was short. More engines roared from the canyon entrance. Reinforcements. The human returned to her, his armor scratched, his visor dusted with sand. "We have to move now," he said, lifting her once again. This time they didn't run along the canyon floor. Instead, he began climbing one of the steep rock walls, using narrow ledges and cracks for grip. She clung to him tightly, her stomach turning at the sight of the ground far below. Blaster fire hissed past them. From above, he could see the hunters spread out below, their speeders circling like predators. He set her down behind a ridge, then lay flat, aiming his weapon. One by one, he picked them off, forcing the survivors to scatter. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the wind. The human finally lowered his weapon and looked at her. "They will keep coming," he said, "and they won't stop until you're gone." She swallowed hard. "Then why are you still here?" His eyes, visible through the visor for just a moment, were steady. "Because I made a choice, and I don't go back on my choices." He turned away before she could answer, scanning the horizon. Far in the distance, the mountains loomed larger now, their shadows stretching toward them. Somewhere in those shadows, the girl thought, might be safety. But deep down, she knew the chase wasn't over. It had only just begun. The wind was changing again. It was no longer the dry, sharp wind of the open desert. This was heavier, colder, carrying the promise of something worse. The human could feel it in the air, the way seasoned warriors feel the approach of battle. He stopped at the edge of a ridge, scanning the land below. The mountains were close now, their rocky faces dark against the red-gold light of the setting sun. The shadows they cast were deep and long, swallowing the desert floor. Somewhere in those shadows, a storm was building. The alien girl tightened her grip on his shoulder. She could sense it too. The air had a strange taste, like metal and dust. She had lived her whole life in these lands and knew what was coming. A mountain storm. Fierce and sudden, that could tear the skin from your face and bury you. Alive in minutes, the human adjusted his hold on her and began moving down the slope. At a faster pace, his armor clinked softly with each step, the only sound against the growing silence. The hunters had fallen behind for now, but both of them knew it would not last. They reached the base of the mountain, just as the first cold gust slammed into them. The human kept moving, eyes scanning for shelter. The girl saw what he was aiming for, a dark opening in the rock, half hidden by a fallen boulder. It wasn't much, but in a storm like this, it could mean the difference between life and death. He ducked inside, the girl still in his arms, and the roar of the wind became a muffled growl. The space was small, just a hollow in the mountain wall, but it was dry. The human set her down against the back wall, then unhooked his pack. He pulled out the same small device she had seen before, the one that sparked with a single press. Soon a small fire burned in the center, its light painting the rock walls. With flickering gold, the girl sat with her knees pulled close, watching the flames. She felt warmer now, but the cold in her chest had nothing to do with the weather. She had been abandoned by her people without a second thought. Why would a stranger, a human, go so far to save her? He broke her thoughts by handing her another packet of food. It was the same as before, wrapped in thin silver. She unwrapped it and took a bite, letting the warmth spread through her. "Why?" she asked quietly, looking up at him. "Why do this?" His visor reflected the firelight as he looked at her. "'Cause I was there once," he said. She frowned, not understanding. He took a seat against the wall, his voice calm but steady. "I was left behind. My own unit thought I was dead. They moved on without me. I survived because someone decided I was worth saving." The girl stared at him, the fire crackling between them. She had never heard a human speak like this. The stories she had been told painted them as cold and merciless. But this man's words carried something different, something she could not name. The storm outside grew louder, the wind howling like a wounded beast. Sand scraped against the rock, finding its way through cracks. The human adjusted his weapon and kept it close, his eyes on the entrance. She followed his gaze. "Do you think they will come tonight?" "They might," he said simply. Hunters do not like to wait. The thought made her shiver, but there was something about his presence that kept her from falling into fear completely. Even here, trapped in a cave with danger outside, she felt safer than she had ever been with her own tribe. A sudden sound broke through the wind, faint, but different from the storm. A crunch of footsteps on stone. The human's head turned, instantly toward the entrance. He moved without hesitation, standing between her and the opening. His voice was low but firm. "Stay behind me." The girl's pulse quickened. She could just make out the shape of someone moving outside, half hidden by the swirling dust. The figure stopped at the entrance, just out of the firelight. The human didn't raise his weapon yet. "Who are you?" "Da-da-da-da-da." He called out over the wind. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it stepped forward, revealing a face hidden under a cracked helmet. A hunter. The hunter's voice was rough. "Hand her over and you walk away alive." The human's reply was cold. "Not going to happen." The hunter's eyes narrowed. "Then you die here." The human moved first. His weapon came up, the shot echoing in the small space. The hunter dropped instantly, the wind carrying the sound away. The girl stared at the body in the entrance, the storm now beginning to bury it under layers of sand. The human stepped forward, dragging the corpse outside, and he returned. He sat back down by the fire, as if nothing had happened. "You could have let him take me," she said quietly. He shook his head. "I already told you. I made a choice." She didn't speak after that. She just sat there, listening to the storm outside, feeling the fire's warmth and his words in her mind. Somewhere deep inside, a thought took root. Maybe she was worth saving after all? The storm raged through the night, its voice a constant roar against the cave walls. Sand hissed as it slid through cracks, piling at the entrance in small drifts. The fire burned low, its light flickering over the stone, making shadows dance. In twist, the alien girl sat with her back to the wall, her eyes half closed. Exhaustion pulled at her, but she was afraid to sleep. Outside was the storm. Inside her mind was worse. The thought of hunters finding them before morning. The human sat near the entrance, his weapon across his lap. He had not moved for hours. It seemed like part of the rock itself, silent and unshakable. But she could see his eyes through the visor, always watching, always listening. A sharp sound cut through the wind. Not the deep growl of thunder or the scrape of sand. This was different. Soft metallic click, then another. Footsteps. Slow, careful, close. The girl's breath caught. Thought the human's head tilted slightly toward the sound, but he didn't speak. Instead, he raised a hand in a small motion for her to stay still. The footsteps came again, this time from the left wall. She frowned. There was no opening there, only solid rock, or so she thought. The human stood silently and pressed his ear to the wall. The sound was faint but clear, someone moving on the other side. The cave wasn't as solid as it seemed. He moved back to her and spoke in a low voice. "Stay by the fire. Don't move." Before she could answer, he was gone, melting into the deeper shadows near the far side of the cave. She strained to see him, but he disappeared completely, as if swallowed by the dark. The sound came again, now louder, followed by the scrape of stone. A section of the wall shifted. A narrow crack widened, spilling a thin beam of cold light into the cave. She froze. From the gap, a thin hand slid through, clawed fingers gripping the stone. Then a head followed, wearing night vision goggles that glowed faint green. The intruder stepped through with silent movements, a long blade in one hand. Behind him, 2 more figures slipped into the cave, each armed and dressed in dark armor. They moved toward the fire, scanning the space. The girl's heart hammered in her chest. She wanted to run, but her body wouldn't move. One of them spotted her and raised his blade. That was when the human struck. He came from behind them, fast and silent, his blade flashing in the firelight. The first intruder didn't even have time to turn before the strike landed. The second spun, raising his weapon, but the human's knee slammed into his side, sending him crashing into the wall. The third tried to retreat toward the crack in the wall, but the human grabbed him by the back of the neck and slammed him to the ground. The fight was quick, brutal, and completely silent, except for the sound of bodies hitting stone. When it was over, all 3 lay still. The human stood over them, his breathing steady, his visor reflecting the dying firelight. The girl finally found her voice. "How did they get in?" "Hidden passage," he replied, glancing toward the crack in the wall. Someone knew we were here. The thought made her shiver. If there were secret ways into the cave, it meant they weren't safe, even in the storm. The hunters were willing to risk the night and the weather just to reach her. He moved quickly, dragging the bodies toward the crack. One by one, he pushed them through into the darkness beyond, then rolled a heavy stone across the opening until it was sealed again. The girl stared at him. "You could have left me while they came in. It would have been easier." His voice was calm, but firm. "I don't take the easy way." She looked at him in silence. In her tribe, strength was measured in how quickly you could end a fight. But this man's strength was something else, the way he stayed when others would leave. The way he fought without hesitation. The way he made her feel less like a burden and more like someone worth protecting. The fire burned lower still, until only embers remained. Outside, the storm began to weaken, its howl fading into the distance. When morning light touched the cave, the human stood and strapped his gear into place. "We move at first light," he said. She nodded. The mountains. "We're close now," but the memory of the shadows in the cave stayed with her. Even in shelter, danger had found them, and she knew it would again. The morning sun climbed slowly over the mountain peaks, casting long shadows across the desert floor. The storm had passed, leaving the air sharp and cold. The cave's entrance was half buried in sand, but the human had already cleared a path. Alien Girl followed him out, shielding her eyes from the glare. The world looked different after the storm, cleaner, emptier, but also more dangerous. She could see fresh tracks in the sand, not animal tracks. Boots. The human crouched to study them. "More than one group," he said quietly, moving fast. Her stomach tightened. They were still being hunted. The mountains were close, but every step felt like it could be their last. He started, walking again, his pace steady, but faster than before. The girl kept close, her legs weak, but stronger than the day he found her. She had learned to match his stride, though his silence still made her wonder what went on inside his mind. After an hour of walking, they reached a steep climb between 2 cliffs. The human stopped, scanned the rocks, then motioned for her to follow. They moved into the narrow pass, the stone walls rising on both sides like the ribs of some ancient beast. It was here, in the shadow of the cliffs, that she asked the question that had been burning in her mind since the night in the cave. "Who are you really?" He didn't answer at first. His boots crunched on the gravel, his eyes scanning every crevice. Then, without looking at her, he said, "I was sent here to kill your people." She froze mid-step. The words hit her like a blow. He stopped too, turning to face her. "My orders were clear. Eliminate threats, secure territory, move on. We were told your kind would never surrender, that every one of you was dangerous. Her throat felt tight. And yet, you didn't kill me. No, he said simply. I didn't. She tried to read his face through the visor, but his voice carried more than his expression. I saw too much, he continued. Not just warriors. I saw children hiding behind broken walls, families running from burning homes. I saw the same fear in their eyes that I had seen in mine years ago. In yours? She asked. He looked past her as if seeing something far away. I was a soldier once. My unit was caught behind enemy lines. Command decided we were lost. They left us, she understood. Then the quiet in his eyes, the way he carried her without asking for anything. He had been abandoned too. Someone found me, he said. Someone who didn't have to. They carried me for 2 days without food or water. They gave me a second chance. The girl's voice was soft. Now, you are giving me one. He nodded once. That? The choice I made. Before she could say more, a sound echoed through the pass. The faint hum of vengeance. The human's head snapped toward the entrance they had come from. Dust rose in the distance. They're here, he said. He pulled her toward a narrow ledge that wound higher along the cliffside. From there, they could see the hunters entering the pass, their speeders weaving between the rocks. The human set her. Behind a cluster of boulders? Stay low. He moved to the edge, rifle in hand. His shots were precise, each one finding its target. 2 speeders went down before the rest scattered for cover. The air filled with the crack of blaster fire, the smell of scorched stone. The girl peeked out, her pulse pounding. She saw one hunter climb the far wall, moving fast, blade in hand. He was heading straight for the human's position. Without thinking, she grabbed a loose stone and hurled it with all her strength. It struck the climber's helmet, sending him slipping down the wall. The human glanced back at her, a brief flicker of surprise in his eyes, before turning back to finish the fight. Minutes later, the pass was silent again. The remaining hunters had fled, their engines fading into the distance. The human lowered his weapon, scanning for movement. She stood slowly, her hands still trembling. You could have told me before, she said. He slung the rifle across his back. Would it have changed anything? She thought about it. Maybe, or maybe not. He started walking again, and she followed. The mountains loomed larger now, their shadows stretching. Long across the ground, she knew something had shifted between them. The truth was out, and yet she did not feel afraid of him. If anything, she felt safer than before. They climbed higher, the wind colder here, carrying the faint smell of rain. Somewhere beyond these peaks lay safety. But she also knew the final fight was coming. The hunters would not stop until one of them was gone. The human seemed to know it too. His voice was quiet as they reached a narrow ridge. Whatever happens. Next, he said, you keep moving forward. She met his gaze through the visor. Not without you. For the first time since she met him, she thought she saw him smile. Just a small curve at the corner of his mouth, but enough to tell her that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. The wind howled through the narrow mountain pass, carrying the faint smell of burning fuel. The human and the alien girl stood on the ridge, the ground falling away steeply on both sides. The peaks around them rose like jagged teeth, and beyond them lay the path to safety, if they could reach it. Far below, dark shapes moved in the valley, speeders, dozens of them. The hunters had returned, but this time they weren't chasing. They were surrounding. The girl's heart pounded. There's too many. The human's voice was calm, steady. Then we make it so there's less. He knelt beside his pack, pulling out his last supplies. A few magazines of ammunition, 2 grenades, and a combat knife. She saw him check each weapon with practiced movements, as if the weight of what was coming didn't bother him. She swallowed hard. You could leave me. They only want me? He looked at her, and his voice held no hesitation. I made a choice. The engines grew louder, the first speeders appearing in the pass below. The hunters fanned out, their weapons glinting in the pale light. The human stepped forward, positioning himself on the narrow ridge where only a few could. "Approach at once. Stay behind me," he said, planting his feet like a wall. The first hunters charged, blasters firing. He answered with sharp, controlled bursts, each shot finding its mark. 2 fell before they reached the ridge. The rest pressed forward, climbing over the bodies of their own. The girl crouched low, but her eyes never left him. He fought like the storm, fierce, unstoppable, every movement precise. But for each hunter that fell, more came. A blast hit close to his position, showering them with rock. He ducked, then pulled one of the grenades from his belt, tossing it into the cluster of advancing hunters. The explosion shook the ridge, sending bodies and debris tumbling into the valley below. Still, they came. One hunter broke through the smoke, blade raised. The human dropped his rifle, catching the blade with his armored forearm before driving his combat knife into the attacker's side. The fight was close, brutal, the kind that left no room for mistakes. The girl's fear turned to something else, a burning determination. She spotted a fallen blaster near the ridge wall. Without thinking, she grabbed it, checking the power cell the way she had seen him do. Her hands trembled, but she stood, aiming at the nearest hunter, climbing toward them. Her first shot missed, but the second hit. The hunter fell, sliding down the slope. She took another shot and another, each one a little steadier than the last. The human glanced back. For a moment there was pride in his eyes. The battle dragged on. The ridge was littered with scorched stone and the fallen. Smoke hung in the air, thick and choking. The hunters were fewer now, but those who remained were the most dangerous armored. Fast, relentless. The last grenade went off with a deafening roar, leaving the pass below scattered with wreckage. Only a handful of hunters were left, but they were closing in. The human's voice was steady. "This is it. Stay low." He met the first one head-on, their blades clashing in a shower of sparks. The second lunged at his side, but the girl fired, hitting him in the chest. The third charged her directly, forcing her to step back, but before he could strike, the human was there, pulling her behind him and ending the fight in one brutal motion. Silence fell over the ridge. The last hunter collapsed, his weapon clattering on the stone. The only sounds were the wind and their breathing. The girl's legs gave way, and she sank to the ground. He stood over her, scanning the valley one last time. The wrecked speeders smoked in the distance. "The rest of the hunters gone or dead. It's over," she whispered. "For now," he replied. They moved slowly along the ridge, the mountains rising higher around them. The path ahead narrowed into a steep trail that wound between the peaks. Beyond it lay safety, a hidden settlement where hunters did not dare to go. As they walked, the girl looked at him. "You could have left 100 times. His answer was simple. "Told you. Don't go back on my choices." She didn't speak after that. The words were enough. By the time they reached the highest point, the sun was setting, painting the peaks in gold and fire. She stood beside him, looking out over the land she had once thought would be her grave. She realized she was still alive because of him, not because he had to save her, but because he had chosen to again and again. And in that moment, she knew something else. She was no longer just a survivor. She was his, and he, in his own way, belonged to her too. The wind swept past them, carrying the last echo of the battle into the distance. Ahead was the unknown, but for the first time, it didn't frighten her, because she was not walking into it alone.